It didn't start with aggression. It started with proximity. Two Su-57s appeared where airspace narrowed and options thinned. The RAF Typhoon didn't turn away. No warnings were exchanged. No signals were rushed. The encounter ended before anyone expected it to. The encounter didn't announce itself with speed or sound. It began the way most serious air incidents do, quietly, on instruments, long before anything was visible to the naked eye. High above contested airspace, a RAF Typhoon was holding a steady patrol line, fuel balanced, sensors active, posture neutral. Nothing about its flight suggested urgency. That was intentional. Then the picture changed. Two contacts appeared almost simultaneously, not rushing in, not broadcasting presence. The signatures were unfamiliar in their restraint. Fifth-generation profiles, low observable, disciplined emissions. The Typhoon systems refined the data without alarm. Track confidence increased. Identification followed. Su-57s. They weren't there by accident. The Russian fighters approached from offset angles, not to threaten directly, but to compress space. It was a textbook maneuver, subtle, professional, designed to test awareness rather than provoke reaction. The distances closed slowly, deliberately. From the outside, it might have looked uneventful. Inside the cockpit, every second mattered. The Typhoon pilot didn't maneuver. No climb, no turn, no change in speed. That calm wasn't hesitation. It was calculation. Modern air encounters aren't decided by who moves first, but by who understands the geometry. Angles, ranges, sensor overlap, energy states, all of it evolving in real time. The two Su-57s were attempting to shape the engagement, to surround without appearing aggressive, to force a response that would reveal intent. None came. The Typhoon's radar stayed disciplined. Passive sensors did the work instead, building a clean, silent picture. Every movement of the opposing aircraft was tracked, predicted, logged. The pilot knew exactly what was happening, and just as importantly, what wasn't. There were no radio calls, no posturing, no visible escalation. That absence of reaction changed the balance. The Su-57s tightened slightly, close enough now for the encounter to feel intentional. They expected adjustment, a break in pattern, some acknowledgement of pressure. What they got was consistency. The Typhoon held its line with almost stubborn precision, forcing the Russians to keep committing if they wanted control. That was the mistake. By closing further, they reduced their own flexibility. Angles narrowed. Options thinned. What had begun as an attempt to dominate space was becoming a constraint. The Typhoon wasn't surrounded in the way they intended. It was anchored, forcing the geometry to work against them. And then, without warning or drama, the dynamic shifted. Not through speed, not through weapons, but through understanding. The encounter, tense only moments earlier, unraveled just as quietly as it had formed. What followed would last only seconds, but those seconds were decisive. The shift didn't come from a sudden maneuver or a spike in speed. It came from clarity, the kind that arrives when one side realizes the encounter isn't unfolding on its terms. As the distance compressed, the Su-57s began to adjust. Small corrections, subtle changes meant to regain advantage. One eased outward to widen its angle. The other held closer, attempting to maintain pressure. On paper, it was sound coordination. In practice, it exposed something they hadn't intended to show. Indecision. The Typhoon pilot saw it immediately. The sensor picture confirmed what instinct already suggested. The formation was no longer shaping the encounter. It was reacting to it. That distinction mattered. Inside the cockpit, nothing changed visually. The aircraft remained steady, unhurried. But beneath that calm exterior, systems aligned, data fused, angles resolved. The Typhoon wasn't escalating. It was finishing the equation. The Su-57s were now close enough for the margins to matter. Energy states tightened. Escape vectors overlapped. Any aggressive move would require commitment, and commitment without certainty is a dangerous thing in the air. The Russians hesitated, just briefly, but long enough. That pause was decisive. The Typhoon didn't chase. It didn't challenge. It simply held the space exactly as it was, forcing the opposing pilots to confront an uncomfortable reality. Continuing forward would mean escalation without advantage. Pulling away would mean conceding control. One of the Su-57s made the choice first. A slight bank, a widening of distance, not a retreat, just a release of pressure. The second followed moments later, restoring separation and breaking the geometry they had worked to create. The encounter, intense only seconds earlier, began to dissolve. No words were exchanged. The Typhoon maintained course, its posture unchanged from the beginning. From a distance, nothing about the scene suggested dominance or victory. 3 aircraft passing near one another at altitude. Routine, unremarkable. But inside the cockpits, the outcome was understood. This wasn't a contest of platforms or numbers. It was a demonstration of restraint, awareness, and timing. The Su-57s had sought to test resolve. Instead, they found it. Quiet, measured, and immovable. As separation increased, the airspace returned to its earlier stillness. Tracks diverged, sensors relaxed. The moment passed without ceremony. That was the point. Some encounters aren't meant to end with spectacle. They end when one side realizes there's nothing to gain by pushing further. And by the time that realization arrives, the decision has already been made. For them. The separation widened without instruction or acknowledgement. No abrupt turns, no acceleration. Just a gradual return to neutral geometry, the kind that signals professionalism rather than withdrawal. The Su-57s resumed parallel tracks, their presence still noted, but no longer imposed. The RAF Typhoon remained exactly where it had been all along. Its speed never changed. Its course stayed fixed. To an outside observer, nothing suggested that the airspace had just been contested. The sky looked empty again, calm and uneventful. But the absence of drama didn't mean the absence of consequence. Inside the Typhoon, the pilot transitioned back to routine monitoring. Systems stepped down in the same controlled order they had aligned. No comments were necessary. The data told the story clearly enough. Timestamps, vectors, sensor confidence levels. Everything was recorded. Nothing needed interpretation. What had occurred wasn't a confrontation in the traditional sense. No one had won ground. No one had fired a shot. Yet control had shifted decisively in a matter of seconds. The difference lay not in capability, but in comfort under pressure. The Su-57s had entered the encounter expecting response, reaction, some indication that their presence carried weight. What unsettled them wasn't resistance, but the lack of it. Silence forced assumptions. Assumptions narrowed options, and narrowed options removed leverage. By the time the Russian pilots understood the dynamic, the moment to influence it had already passed. Encounters like this rarely make reports public. They're filed, reviewed, and stored away. Not as warnings, but as references. Examples of how airspace control isn't always asserted through dominance, but through discipline. The Typhoon didn't need to demonstrate power. It let the situation do that on its behalf. By refusing to rush the timeline, it forced the turners, the other side, to reveal theirs. And once that happened, the outcome became inevitable. As the tracks continued to diverge, the sky returned fully to routine operations. No follow-on maneuvers, no signaling, just distance, increasing with every second. The lesson, however, lingered. Modern air encounters aren't about who arrives first or flies closest. They're about who understands the space, the pressure, and the moment. And sometimes the most decisive move is choosing not to make one at all. The engagement ended the way it began, quietly. But the balance it revealed was anything but. What mattered most about the encounter wasn't how it ended, but how little had been required to end it. No afterburners, no aggressive turns, no visible assertion of force. Control had been established through patience, not pressure. That distinction is easy to miss. Modern air power is often framed around performance, speed, stealth, weapons loadouts. But in encounters like this, those factors sit in the background. The deciding element is decision-making under uncertainty. Who is willing to wait? Who is forced to act? The Su-57s had approached with intent, but intent alone doesn't dictate outcomes. As the geometry tightened, they were faced with a narrowing set of choices. Escalation would have required commitment without a clear advantage. Withdrawal, while safe, would concede initiative. Holding position meant time would continue to work against them. The Typhoon needed none of those choices. By maintaining a constant profile, it removed urgency from its own side and transferred it entirely to the other. Every second that passed without reaction increased the cost of pressing further. What initially felt like dominance began to feel like exposure. That's how pressure actually works in controlled environments. It doesn't come from movement. It comes from the absence of it. For T, he RAF pilot, the engagement reinforced a core principle of air combat that predates modern sensors. Awareness creates options, and options create control. The Typhoon never appeared dominant because it didn't need to. It understood the encounter faster, and understanding is often enough. For the Russian pilots, the lesson was quieter but heavier. They hadn't been outflown. They hadn't been threatened. They had simply encountered an aircraft and a pilot, comfortable operating without giving anything away. That kind of confidence is difficult to counter because it offers nothing to react to. These moments rarely reach public discussion. They exist in data logs, debrief rooms, and training scenarios, not as incidents, but as case studies. Examples of how modern deterrence is often exercised without spectacle. Nothing about the sky changed after the encounter. Commercial traffic continued. Patrol routes remained the same. The Typhoon carried on as if nothing had happened, but something had been clarified. Airspace control isn't always seized. Sometimes it's conceded, quietly, by the side that realizes too late it has nothing left to test. And in those moments, the most powerful statement isn't made with speed or sound, it's made with restraint.